Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Boardman Black and Gold podcast with Zane and David. And we are finally on to our wide receivers episode, a very much anticipated episode, I think. We've got a lot to talk about in this one. It's no surprise that the wide receivers were perhaps the weakest units on the Steelers this last year. George Pickens was the wide receiver one in the absence of Deontay Johnson. We were excited for that, but at the same time, the results they weren't there from the wide receiver core. But as we have learned in the last couple of days, we have dropped Preston Smith, who we traded for at the deadline, and that's going to free up about $12 million in cap space for this coming season. So we have some options in free agency. We have some options in the draft. And there is the possibility of maybe some trade candidates in some certain places. David, kind of what are your initial thoughts on the wide receiver room in general? I know you have a very strong take on George Pickens. Maybe let's flesh that out before we get into the weeds of everything else.
Okay, so yeah, definitely. Overall, before I talk about George Pickens, I think our overarching theme of the wide receivers kind of emphasizes what we talked about with the quarterbacks and the running backs. It's like we're going to talk about a lot of guys here, but it'll be interesting to see because we've talked about scheme so much that I don't know if anybody would make a difference because of our scheme just being so poor. But that being said, I do think George Pickens, we need to trade him. I don't want him in a Steelers uniform anymore. I think that his off the field antics, okay, it's not even off the field anymore. It's when he's on the field too. Like all the penalties, arguing with fans, doing just a ton of stuff. I don't like any of it. He's not even really that good. Like, yes, he makes an insane catch every once in a while, but can you run an actual route? Like he's like Martavis Bryant, but with less targets. And he definitely could catch better. But I just don't really see his worth. Like to me, like that's dead weight. If I were the head coach, I'd be like, get him off my team as soon as possible. Give me more picks. I don't know. Give me a player. But I just don't see the appeal to him at all. Besides the fact that okay, he makes like an insane catch once a game. It's like, yeah, that's cool to watch. And in the moment, I'm like, oh, that's awesome. But I'm like, I don't like I don't know. There's something different about him where it's like, oh, I like to watch Jamar Chase. I like to watch Puka Nakua. I like to watch Justin Jefferson. I don't like to watch George Pickens. So I would love for him to be traded.
That's crazy. And I don't know if you might be the only one that thinks that. I mean, I'm sure you're not the only one that thinks that, but I feel like that's a pretty strong take. Now, I guess the question is, what would you want for him? Like, what's your desired return if they were to trade him?
I think we could reasonably, I think it's a reasonable thing to get a second round pick. I don't think that would be like a crazy thing. And I would be content with that if it was a team that was like, if their second round pick was higher than ours. I think that could be very beneficial. And like, again, kind of what we're talking about with scheme, we don't really even use him that well. So it's like, why would we even have him on the team if we could like get some draft capital, get a, I don't know, maybe a better wide receiver somehow. I know that would be like an unlikely trade, but I just think that there's some like, draft capital or something else that we could get out of him that I just don't really think we're getting he's not a number one. Like his game is hollow. And then you look at the other number one guys, like the guys that I've mentioned, those guys will run in the middle of the field and make catches. They'll make catches anywhere on the field. George Pickens makes one catch, and it's a deep ball or a comeback route. And very rarely does he do any other route. So I think that it's like, okay, yeah, he's a number one, kind of, but like not really. He just has one route. And so it's like, I don't see the appeal.
Well, I think what we saw with Deontay Johnson leaving in a trade before this last season was that, yes, George Pickens overall as a number one wide receiver is going to be productive because he was around like a top 10 wide receiver in terms of just yards this season. He almost had 1,000 he almost had 1,000 yards like catching this season. But the thing about it is that with how hollow our offense was, he was the only option. I mean, we're not going to throw to Van Jefferson. We're not going to throw to, guys like Mike Williams, even though we should have. And, Calvin Austin even seemed to be overshadowed. I mean, I just named like the 4 wide receivers that we have at our disposal. And if George Pickens is the number one guy, it's like, yes, like we want him to be touching the ball often in a game. But similarly, like it seemed like he was better even yet under Deontay Johnson when he was kind of like he wasn't well, I mean, would you say he was the first option or the second option even just 2 years ago? Because I'm kind of in between on what I think on that.
I would lean towards the first. I think that he kind of garnered that right from the beginning.
Even with Deontay Johnson kind of being the number one guy on the depth chart.
Yeah, and I think that wasn't Deontay Johnson hurt a little bit that year.
He might have been battling like some nagging injuries and whatnot,
Okay.
but I mean, it's if you compare the two of them, their production was pretty similar. But again, it's just George Pickens makes this really incredible catch once a game, and if he's your number 2 wide receiver doing that, then it's like, yeah, that's really cool. But for us right now, he's going to be in the last year of his contract. He'll be a pending free agent at the end of this upcoming season. I don't really see the long-term investment. Like, I don't see that being like a good option because again, with his on the field and off the field antics, he's kind of a diva. He demands a little bit more attention than some of these other guys that are much more low maintenance. And frankly, I think that there's some talented guys that we can go out and get both in the draft, like you said, and in free agency. Now, I don't think I would necessarily want to trade him yet this offseason, but depending on where the Steelers are, maybe halfway through this coming season, if we're kind of down the drain, then that's when I would say, hey, here's George Pickens to this contender, and he immediately would make a good team, perhaps a great team in the mind of the NFL. Maybe not necessarily in our mind because obviously we know all the drama that comes with him, but from the eyes of outside beholders, it's like the opportunity to get George Pickens at the trade deadline would be huge. And maybe we could even get more for him then because, the values would ramp up at that point. So does that kind of track? Is that making sense?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think that would be a great thing, kind of to see where we're at. And I think that's a real possibility. I would not be against that at all. I would like that. And I also think that, I mean, since you mentioned it, who knows, like as of right now, what we'd be able to get from him. Like we know we're probably going to get like 800 yards and 5 or 6 touchdowns from him. So it's like if, last year was contract, like if we just let him play and then we let him go, like I'd also be content with that. Because like, why not? If you're not going to get anything crazy from him, just use him and with that ability, and hopefully he doesn't cost you games with penalties. But one thing I think that um, I don't know, I'm not going to put this on him necessarily because I'm not saying that he's doing this. I don't know. Like again, I know that he is a diva. He's a bit of a head case, but like I don't know him personally. I don't know the ins and outs, so I'm not going to say that he does this. But I think the issue that we've had, um, really ever since 2020, is that we just don't have a room. We don't have a wide receiver room. We have George Pickens. Like when Arthur Smith meets with wide receivers, is it just George Pickens? Like, does he meet with the other guys? And like what you mentioned, Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin, Mike Williams, which or sorry, not yeah, no, yeah. All 3 of them, even Van Jefferson in the wild card game, and like they showed some skill when they were throwing the ball. And so it almost makes me want to get rid of George Pickens so that you could utilize the whole room. It's like we don't have to focus on one guy. It's like let's build a room. Let's build a core of guys that we target that we're like, let's get 5 targets to each of these guys each game. Like, can we game plan that? Can we game plan to spread the ball around instead of Pickens, Fryermuth, Pickens, Fryermuth, Pickens, Fryermuth? And I think we really, And like, who knows? Maybe they don't trust these guys for some reason, which to me doesn't make sense. Because like what you were saying, like we're putting these guys out there. Why are you putting them out there if you're never going to use them or if you don't even trust them? It doesn't make sense. So I would love it if we focused more on building a core group, building a group of guys that we were like, let's target all of them.
I agree with that. Now, I don't agree with your thought of trading him to get that because I think the remedy to that could be just to make him have somebody else around him that's of a similar caliber. Like um T Higgins has been floated around for years, I feel like, and I don't know if he's going to be back with Cincinnati. I think Cincinnati wants him back. I know for a fact that Joe Burrow wants him back, but I don't know if he's going to go back to Cincinnati. And he's one of these guys that's like, he's a blue chip guy in free agency. And we could definitely go out and get him if we really wanted to, especially with the cap space that we have at our disposal. Now, we'd probably have to contend with a team like Washington, who has even more cap space at their disposal and would probably be itching at the opportunity to get Terry McLaurin, another guy. But again, that's the whole point is like, if Washington is going to say, hey, we need to get Terry McLaurin, somebody else, why can't we just say, hey, let's go get George Pickens, somebody else, so that not everything has to be on his shoulders? And then subsequently, if there's somebody else like a T. Higgins who is on the same plane as George Pickens, then that creates two problems for secondaries to deal with. That creates like, the number one cornerback, they have to pick who are they gonna go with. So a guy like T. Higgins is an option to do that. And I think that T. Higgins, yeah, he's still pretty young. He's gonna be 26 this coming offseason. So I like the idea of T. Higgins. I'll let you kind of counter with what you think about that. But even farther down in the draft, I think there's options that we could supplement George Pickens with. And even, there's some trade options too, which we'll get at in the moment as well. So are, you kind of said trade Pickens to get to the room, but what about just like creating the room with George Pickens involved?
Yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to that. I think that could definitely work. My fear would be that his ego is too big for a room and he would want just him. But if he was willing to do it and, obviously didn't go crazy about it. I mean, yeah, I think that whatever we can do to build the best room is the best option. And I like T. Higgins. I think he's been an amazing number two for Cincinnati um, throughout his entire career there. And so, like, if we were to get to him, I would not be opposed at all. I think that he's a great player, great receiver. I know that one name that's been thrown around, and I'm pretty sure, like, I thought I saw a text from you that this guy said he wanted to come to Pittsburgh was Deebo Samuel, which I gotta say he's also a bit of a diva, but I wouldn't be opposed because I mean he's electric, and I think he fits the archetype that Arthur Smith likes. I think that what we could do with Debo Samuel is what Arthur Smith did with Cordarrelle Patterson when he was in Atlanta, where Cordarrelle Patterson was a receiver, was a running back, was a receiving back. That's what Debo does. Debo lines up as a running back. He plays receiver. Like I think that Arthur Smith likes that kind of role, and Debo would be a lot better than having Patterson doing it now. I don't know. There's not any other guys. I know that Cooper Kupp has been thrown around. He's getting up there, but like he's been thrown around. I don't know other names that are big in the free agency right now.
Well, I'll interject on that Cooper Cup comment because if we were to go and trade for Cooper Kupp, it would be the third straight season that we get a former Rams wide receiver because it was Allen Robinson 2 years ago. And then we got Van Jefferson this last year. And then we would, theoretically, we could get Cooper Kupp this year, which the whole thing with the Rams wide receivers is they're all good blockers. Like Cooper Kupp is a great blocker. That was half of the reason that we had Van Jefferson on the field half the time this season was because he's a good blocking wide receiver. For whatever reason, Arthur Smith is just infatuated with blocking wide receivers. And it's funny because George Pickens won't block a soul and the rest of the entire room will block everybody. Like, they'll block a defensive lineman if they needed to. So
Right.
if we're talking about archetypes, which I do agree with what you say about Deebo Samuel because he's kind of this utility man, one size like can do a bunch of different things. And especially if we don't bring back Najee, then that could be another option, to kind of be this Swiss Army knife that can be moved around, but would be totally better than Cordarrelle Patterson, who is, again, he's aging, he'd be in the last year of his contract. He's not worth a lot of money, but that's like the type of guy that I think that they were hoping to get with Cordarrelle Patterson, kind of like what you were saying. But again, with Cooper Kupp, he's older, he's injury ridden. I think that maybe that his value is declined to the point where we could get away with maybe not giving up a whole lot for him. And again, if trends continue, it would be, like I said, the third straight season that we go out and we get a former Rams wide receiver. So I guess like two questions for you, and they're pretty much the same question. But what would it take to get Debo, and then what do you think it would take to get Cooper Kupp? And I guess subsequently, could we do both? If we're in the market, why don't we just corner the market and take everybody?
Well, yeah, I mean that's a good point. So is Debo a free agent or did he just want to trade?
He wants traded. He wants out.
So I do think, unfortunately, the Niners are going to want a lot. I think that they'll want a high pick, and who knows, maybe a player or two. So I think the similar thing that happened with Brandon Ayuk is that the Niners are just going to want more than we're willing to give. But with Cooper Kupp, I do think honestly a fifth rounder or a fourth rounder, maybe with a little something else, might pass by because of what you said, and I agree. And I mean, even though obviously they have some say, but they don't have the final say. But I just don't know if obviously Debo said he wanted to, but a guy like Cooper Kupp, he's I mean, man, he had an amazing season 3 years ago or 4 years ago. And so it's does he want to go to a team where wide receivers don't get thrown to? Which wide receiver wants to come to a team where they don't get thrown to? So I think that's going to be a hard thing to look at. But I would say that I wouldn't want, getting both of them could be a nice idea. I wouldn't want to sell the house though. I wouldn't want to get rid of all our draft. I wouldn't want to get rid of for either of them a top 3 draft pick.
Like 3 rounds, first 3 rounds. Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to give up any of those. Maybe third for Debo. I would consider third, but the first 2 absolutely not. And so yeah, I don't know the likelihood of getting both. I think it's hard because Debo said he wants to come to us. So I don't know how these two guys would play out with us and our interactions with them are going to be. I think that Mike Tomlin will lean more towards Debo, but
now I'm going to throw the nastiest knuckleball to you, perhaps in the history of this podcast. We've already talked about the quarterbacks, and it seems like that if anybody's going to come back to Pittsburgh between Russ and Fields, it's going to be Fields. We've already had that episode. We've talked about that. Now, here's the thing. I said one name in that episode that is very much connected to Cooper Kupp. And I see you smirking, and maybe you don't know exactly what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it now. What if we just straight up traded for Matt Stafford and Cooper Kupp in the same deal and said, all right, go out and win your last championship?
I'm I like Fields so much, and I want him to be our guy. But I mean, I would not be opposed to that. I think that Matt Stafford's a great quarterback. I think that he has unbelievable chemistry with Cooper Kupp. I think that they could have a bit of a resurgence. And I mean, Matt Stafford has just made wide receivers great. And the only issue with that is Arthur Smith, you better let Matt Stafford do his thing because Matt Stafford can run his offense. And if it was true that he wasn't letting Russell Wilson have the full playbook, basically, then we'd be in trouble the same way with Matt Stafford. But if we could get a guy like Matt Stafford who can run his own offense, because we know that at the current moment, Fields can't do that. Um, I wouldn't be opposed to getting both of those guys and just seeing what we could do and make happen because they would work well together. I think that Stafford could. I mean, we saw what he did with Megatron. George Pickens isn't as I don't even know dense as Megatron is, but he's got the height and the size. So I mean, I think it could be a good recipe.
I like the idea of it. Now, I guess the thing that is turning me off to it is, I mean, that has to be like a haul of picks, right? I mean, and probably like a good player too, I would have to think. Because again, the Rams were a playoff team this last year. And even though Kupp wants out and it seems like Stafford wants a different change of scenery, you know, like something's got to give because they got to get something for them because they're not just going to let them get off scot free.
Right. And I think yeah, I think that if that were to happen, we'd have to give up our draft this year and we'd have to just kind of say we're not going to get much picks. We're going to like focus on winning now, which again, kind of we talked about how we don't really have a direction. It's like, do we even think we can win now? So it's like, why would we trade those draft picks? But it all depends on what our upper management thinks. If like we get those guys, if they do think we can win now, then it'd be a gamble, but they might do it.
But here's something literally you said. I don't know when you said this, but I remember you saying this at some point. Like this would essentially just be like the Rams from when was it 2022? That was when they won or 21. So the Rams, they sold their soul for a Super Bowl that year. And they gave up all of their draft capital. They hadn't had a first round pick in who knows how long because they just flipped everybody and they said, okay, like this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna go all in. They locked up everybody and they said, okay, this is the year. And they won the Super Bowl that year. So if you're Art Rooney and you don't have a direction and you're Mike Tomlin, who's just like, he's floundering around, like, I can't win a playoff game, maybe the very tantalizing thing would to be is just, hey, let's sell everything and like just go for it. And if it doesn't work out, then we'll suck. And then we'll get the desired result that, we probably could have. Because again, I'm thinking about this season and like, we don't even know what we want to do because we don't know if we can be bad and we don't know if we can be good. So why not just sell everything and try to be good? And then if it means that you're bad the next year, like 2020, that'd be 2026, then that's great because then the draft is in 2026. You can get your quarterback, you can get everything, like sell it all, go all in. And, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And, then we would probably have the losing season that we've been waiting so long for. And, maybe it causes us to lose for 2 or 3 seasons, but then eventually, you build back up and you're right back to where you were. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that, I guess?
I wouldn't be opposed. I feel like we mentioned like last year we felt like we did that with all the players we signed and we got Fields and Wilson. So doing it again would feel weird. Um, but I would still be I still think we'd be down because then if we don't do good, then guess what? That's what we want to happen. We fall apart and we start over, or we go and win now. It's like we don't want the mediocre. So I think that I'm not opposed to it at all. And it just makes me kind of like we were talking about with the upper leadership. It just makes me wonder if like our upper leadership really knows what they're doing. Like specifically this President Smith thing. It's like, why did you trade for him just to release him at the end of the year? Like, I don't know. I feel like we're like, and then now, I mean, obviously a lot of these moves that we made to try and make this great playoff team didn't work. I do still have faith in Omar Khan. Obviously, it's other upper leadership that I'm worried about, but I fear that they don't know where to go next. But I wouldn't be opposed if they sold out, tried to do it again.
I think I'm honestly kind of convincing myself that we should do that because again, it would just mean that they're decisive. Like we don't have a direction right now, so you might as well just pick. Like pick if you're going to try to be good or pick that you're going to be bad. Don't just continue to be in the middle because then again, we'll be right back where we are a year from today and we'll be like, well, what are we doing? Like we have no idea what we're doing. We still don't know what we're doing even in this moment. And I think even last year at this time, we didn't know what we were doing and we still just continue to go 10-7 every single year. So, go 12-5 or go 5-12. Like, pick one. Like, again, we've talked about it before, but we would not be upset if we had a bad season because it would mean that, like, we're starting to at least trend in a certain direction. But when you continue to be 9-8, when you continue to be 10-7, you're not going anywhere. You're just plateauing, and you're not initiating going better or going worse. So I would be completely fine with it. And I honestly kind of think we should do it, even if it takes some draft capital. And, maybe that's a poor idea, but I guess the alternatives would be to actually address the wide receiver type of stuff in the draft, which, there are plenty of options. And you said that the running back draft was pretty deep. Would you say that the wide receiver draft is any more or less deep than the running backs?
Um, I think I know less names, but I do think there is a decent amount of depth. Just from things I saw in the college football playoff, like guys they talked about during the games. I think there are, at least for like the first round, maybe a little in the second round, there will be a decent amount of wide receivers that I think will be quality guys in the NFL.
I think so too. And one of those guys is your Ohio State guy, which, maybe we'll just draft everybody from Ohio State. And, since they won the Natty, then, maybe the Steelers will just win the Super Bowl. But talk to me about your Ohio State guy. I can hardly say his name, but I'm sure you can.
Yeah, so our guy is Emeka Egbuka, and he's awesome. He's been great. I love him. He like the stats weren't that great this year. Like the stats aren't kind of what you expect from an Ohio State wide receiver. It was still a good year, but he was definitely, I think, a little overshadowed by Jeremiah Smith. But like when you watch the game, like his presence and just his ability goes beyond stats. Like he is an unbelievable route runner. Like it just insanely good. Like, oh, it's just beautiful to watch him run routes. And he also has great hands. Like he made some really good catches. There was a catch in the Rose Bowl where he only had one hand and was able to bring it in. And then there was another catch against Indiana where it was a great route and he got past the guy in the end zone and the Indiana guy still tipped it. And he was able to like adjust his hands to the tip and bring it in. And so I think there is nothing but upside for him, especially like on our team, because we have the go route guy. If we get the route runner, the technician, who's going to get himself open. I think there's no downside to getting him.
Now, he has to be a first round projection, right?
Oh, I mean, I'd be shocked. I'd be shocked if he didn't go in like the first 20. And I think he's going to perform extremely well, at his pro days and at the combine. And I think his draft stock's only going to get higher. I think that the only reason why he wouldn't go that high is just because his stats weren't jaw dropping this year.
So you said that he was kind of second fiddle to Jeremiah Smith, who was a freshman, right? Am I right?
A true freshman, yeah.
Wow. I mean, that's crazy stuff. But again, trying to fit in with what the Steelers need. How great would that be to have that type of guy almost as a wide receiver too, who might be overshadowed by a guy like George Pickens, but like you said, can be the technician. I love that word. That's a great word to use it because like that's what we need we need a guy that can pick apart like a zone defense, man kind of, we can do okay against man. We have guys that can high point and can do that type of stuff. If we bring back Mike Williams, that's an option to do that. Obviously, George Pickens is great against man coverage, but against zone coverage, when you have to have a good route runner, like we don't have that at all. Maybe minus like Calvin Austin, but again, he's just, I don't know. Like I don't know how much higher of a role we can give him than what we've already seen out of him. I think we could, and I think he could be very productive, but maybe not as the wide receiver too that he kind of was this season. So, and even like if you slot him or Egbuka next to like a guy like Calvin Austin against a zone defense, then with Calvin Austin's speed, you have to account for that. And then with the route running ability and the go route potential of George Pickens, does that complete the wide receiver room? Like, is that a one fix solution to what we need?
I think it definitely could because, kind of like what you were saying, we have the deep guys. Like, I think that George Pickens obviously is a deep ball guy. I think Mike Williams specifies in deep balls. And Calvin Austin, like, sure, he might be able to. I don't think Calvin Austin's like a terrific route runner, and he has that speed, so he's meant for going deep. So if we got that guy that, like, like what you said, you line him up with them, and like he eventually breaks off the pack with his great routes. Like, I think it opens up that middle, and even if you line up like him and Fryermuth together, like they can both play off each other in that middle, and I think it really could. Again, obviously, if they use them correctly, it really could open up that. What did Tony Romo call him? Or no, Troy Aikman. What did Troy Aikman call the routes over the middle?
You like an elementary defense? Is that what, or elementary offense? Is that what you're talking about?
He said like there is no middle to this offensive. Like, you've got the deep ball, you've got those drag routes, and there's no like across the middle. Intermediate. Yeah. Like, I think getting him could like give a birth to our intermediate pass game.
And I like what you said about Fryermuth, and I kind of thought about that after I stopped talking about Calvin Austin. But I mean, that's a great point. Like, you could run crossers with the two of them because, again, like our offense, like we didn't go anywhere in the middle of the field. And if this guy is to the point of a good route runner, and I think Fryermuth, like, he's not, obviously he's a tight end, and you can only be so much as a tight end with your routes. But I think Fryermuth is a good enough tight end as a route runner to supplement well with a true wide receiver that can run some good routes. I'm kind of thinking that might be a very simple solution to this problem. Now, I'm looking at the draft board, and Egbuka is currently ranked the number 3 wide receiver behind McMillian from Arizona, who's kind of like um, the consensus first wide receiver taken, and then Luther Burden from Mizzou, who I guess had a really good year. And I think the two of them are kind of maybe like 1A and 1B in terms of the wide receivers in this draft. And then behind them, there's a couple of Texas wide receivers. Isaiah Bond is one of the names that I recognize specifically. And then Trey Harris from Ole Miss is kind of in there as well. But Egbuka is kind of like that number 3 wide receiver. And I guess kind of the same question that we had to kind of address with our running backs, like how many teams really need a wide receiver? And, even thinking again about free agency, because T. Higgins is on the market. I think Stephon Diggs is also a free agent. That might be a little bit of a, kind of in between. Like, I don't know if I really want to try it with Diggs, but I feel like there's a plenty of options to address wide receiver, but specifically with what the Steelers need, could we foreseeably trade up to get the opportunity to take him in this upcoming draft? Because you said he's probably going to go in the top 20, but we're right at 21. So could we see him dropping that far, or do you think we would have to trade up for him?
I think we would have to trade up, and I would not be against that at all. I would love to trade up, and yeah, because I think that like free agents, like kind of the names you dropped, besides T. Higgins, didn't really like, I don't know, draw me in. I guess like Stephon Diggs, like I was like, no, 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 thank you. So I think that like out of all the receivers, like, disregarding the trades right now because anything can happen there. Just discussing the free agents in the draft, I think Egbuka, and I'm not just saying this because I'm an Ohio State guy, could be the best option for us. So I would love if we did what we needed to do to get up and get him.
Here's the other wide receivers that I'm kind of seeing that are available. So we've got Stephon T. Higgins, and then we've got Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, Chris Godwin, and Brandon Cooks. And then there's another guy that, we could just go out and get Deontay Johnson again in free agency. What do you think about that?
I think I'm okay with Deontay Johnson. We can keep him where he is. He doesn't got to come back. I think that the name that probably sticks out most is Chris Godwin, and I know that he's been injury prone the past couple of years, but I do like him, and I do think he plays well, and so I wouldn't be. And he's been a number 2 for Mike Evans, so he can fill that role right back in with George Pickens. So he'd be one that I wouldn't dislike seeing. The rest, I'd probably be either I would dislike it or I'd kind of be like, I don't really know if that's gonna work. as far as the free agents go.
So there's one more option that I was kind of intrigued by just watching college football this season, which aside, I would think I watched more college football this year than I have any year ever.
Oh, thanks.
And I won't necessarily say I enjoyed it more than the NFL because I think my big problem with college sports is I just don't know enough names. And, just watching a game, it's like, oh, like that team is winning, but I don't know who the heck is on that team. But there's one guy that stood out to me, and it was Xavier Restrepo from Miami. And he broke like every single wide receiver like record from the University of Miami, excuse me. And he had Cam Ward as his quarterback and, trying to, juxtapose like the quality of quarterback with, what we currently have, which is probably going to be Justin Fields. But I'm thinking about him and, the Steelers love to go like, they don't take a wide receiver in the first round. This might be the year that they do that. But if they stay on brand with, hey, the standard is the standard, I couldn't necessarily say that they won't go second or third round and get a guy like Restrepo, who I think is ranked like just inside the top 10 of wide receivers in this draft board. So I don't know how much you know about him. I guess I don't know a whole lot about him other than the fact that he just broke every single Miami record there was for a wide receiver. And, that in itself is pretty like, I would say that's attractive. Like, even regardless of what you say, would you kind of agree with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that I don't really know him too well, but I know that their Miami offense had an unbelievable year. And so yeah, if we stick to our status quo, I think that could be a very likely scenario. But yeah, I'm not opposed to that at all.
Okay, so this is kind of our last talk about the offense. We've talked about the quarterbacks, we've talked about running backs, we've talked about wide receivers. Again, we're not going to touch tight ends because we have like 7 of them, and we have plenty of them. Offensive line is the next thing that we kind of have to get taken care of. But again, Troy Fatanu, who was our first round pick last year, missed all of last season. I think we saw that Zach Frazier is potentially a career center with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think we like him a lot. James Daniels didn't play at all last season. He's going to be in free agency. Maybe we can sign him back. Maybe we don't. But I think that the offensive line is starting to take shape. But as far as the actual skill players on offense, now that we kind of have the big picture of what we kind of want, let's just say what you want for the entire offense this season. Again, given what we know about the running back situation, what we want at quarterback, which I think we both agreed on, and then, now what we know about the wide receivers.
I think like so you're asking kind of what I would want for the like receivers or for the whole core.
I would say the entire thing. I mean, you can integrate it in, but like we talked about when in our running backs episode, which you can go back and listen to, like we we said that like we might have to spend a first round pick if we want to get the certain type of running back that we want if we let Najee walk in free agency. But, if we do that, then we can't get Egbuka or a similar caliber wide receiver in the first round. So something has to give. So again, maybe the best thing to be would be start with the wide receivers and then from there kind of branch it out to the rest of the offense.
Okay, so I think what I would like to do, um, I think with the first round we get Egbuka. That would be ideal, and then I think from there, I think that you look into investing how much Debo would cost, and if it's nothing crazy, I would say go for Debo, and then I think running backs, depending, I think he's going to want more money than I think we should give him. I think my ideal scenario, because we're going to use our picks for the wide receivers, let Najee walk and sign Jalen Warren and make him our number one and kind of go from there. And then I think that would be my ideal pick for both of those. Now, a question I have for you, because we obviously talked about the quarterback already, but I've seen rumors Aaron Rodgers is not going to the Jets. and there's been a lot of talk about like, oh, the Steelers. What's your take on that? What do you think?
I got two letters for you. N-O. I'm not gonna just say that a 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers is gonna make all of our problems go away. I literally watched him with my own two eyes before the Jets Steelers game that Russ debuted in. Like I was with Z Money Hill, like maybe 10 rows back, and he was on the Jets side of the field when they were warming up, and I'm just watching this guy, and I know he's a Hall of Famer. I know he's one of the best quarterbacks, you know, maybe ever. His winning pedigree isn't as good as maybe some other quarterbacks, but as far as just a quarterback, he is one of the best that's played in my lifetime and in a lot of people's lifetimes. The thing is, he is 40 years old. He's not the solution. He can't be the solution. And yes, I get it. He's 40 years old, but he's probably going to demand some money, like I would think. And it's just not worth the investment for me. Because that's another thing is you have to think about the quarterback right now as what are we willing to invest in? Are we willing to invest in Jalen Milroe as a first round quarterback or a second or third round quarterback? Are we willing to invest in Justin Fields as a quarterback? Quarterback right now has to be an investment. It can't be just, hey, let's throw something at Aaron Rodgers and hope it sticks. Because I think we tried that with Russell Wilson this last year, and it didn't necessarily work with what we were trying to do. Maybe he would be better because Russ is more mobile than Aaron Rodgers, and maybe Aaron Rodgers would just stand back there and just sling it around. But I'm a hard no on that. I can't justify that at all in my mind.
I I completely agree. I do not like Aaron Rodgers, specifically off the field. He's not a team player. We saw with New York specifically is like, I mean, just the way he reacted with his coach. I think it was, I genuinely like, he's the one decision, and maybe Jalen Milroe, but him specifically, if we were to get him as quarterback, I think I would genuinely be like, I'm not going to watch. Like, I just can't. Like, oh my goodness, Mike Tomlin and Aaron Rodgers. Who the heck am I even rooting for? Like, I think that yeah, it would be the worst decision we can make.
I agree. I think it would be worse than Jalen Milroe. And, maybe I don't know if Milroe is going to go in the first round. If he does, I'd be shocked. And if we were the one to take him in the first round, I'd probably cry knowing
Yeah,
that we could have taken literally anything else. But I think, again, we both agree that Justin Fields is the best option. I think Russell Wilson, the weird thing about Russ is that I think he is completely convinced that he's coming back. But I mean, I don't know who's going to tell him. It's kind of just like,
yeah.
I don't think you're coming back, buddy. And, maybe he has believed with every fiber of his being that he will be the quarterback next year for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But if they make that decision, I think that's the mistake as well. And I think I saw today, Justin Fields, he has one demand for the Steelers if they were to re-sign him, and that's to be the number one guy, which I don't think is a ridiculous demand. And frankly, if we were to sign him back and he wasn't the number one guy, then I would say, why the heck did we do it in the first place? So we both agree that Justin Fields is the best option, and it seems like he wants to come back. And if he does, then that makes our problems much less than what they could be, because now we can focus on what we need to do to get him some weapons in the wide receiver room, as well as giving him a decent running back, trying our best to get him an upgrade over Najee Harris.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that that's, very, like what you said, very reasonable. And that's what I would want to happen. So hopefully they make the right decisions. It'll be exciting when stuff can start happening in March to see what goes down.
Yeah, absolutely. And the draft isn't until May, right?
I think, is it May? Is it May? I thought it was like end of April or mid April or like, I thought it was.
Actually, I think you might be right. There was something that's going on in May. Maybe I'm thinking of something different, but I think you might be right that it's like late April. But we have plenty of time to kind of think about that. And like you said, the free agent stuff is going to open up here pretty soon, and then we'll kind of get an idea of, especially what happens with Najee Harris. I kind of feel like whatever happens with Najee Harris is what's going to direct us moving forward, because with the money that's attached to him, with the money that we would have to pay him, that's like that specific allotment of money will say, okay, if we do sign him, then we can't go out and get a guy like, Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel. We definitely can't, go out and get Matt Stafford if that's the case. But if we do let him walk, then that opens a lot of things up for drafting a guy like Egbuka in the first round, maybe going out and taking a flyer on a free agent running back, maybe getting a running back in the second round, something along those lines, or again, just letting Jalen Warren be the guy. But I think Najee is kind of the first domino to fall, and I'd be kind of shocked if something else happened with our skill players on offense before that, if that makes sense.
No, I think that definitely makes sense. I think that it seems likely that he'll be like the first thing to analyze and be decided on. So I agree with that.
Okay. So I think I'm kind of I'm in between. I like taking Egbuka in the first round, but I'm also kind of intrigued at the idea of just trading for Cooper Kupp and Matt Stafford all at once.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know what I want, but I would be okay with both. What would you be okay with that second scenario that I just mentioned?
I would be okay with that.
Yeah. Okay. How crazy would that be? I mean, what would that be on par with in terms of like NFL trades?
Oh man, I mean, I don't know. I mean, on par with when the Rams and the Lions traded Stafford and Goff, I guess.
Well, if that's the case, then the Rams ended up and won the Super Bowl, and the Lions have been very good since then. So, hey, if that's the case, then that seems like a win-win situation to me, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, we'll see what happens. I've seen some pictures, like some AI generated pictures of Matt Stafford in black and gold, and I'm like, I kind of like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I would be. I think he's a great quarterback. He's so smart football wise. So I would not be opposed at all.
And at the same time, again, it would force us to have at least some direction. It's like, okay, we're going to actually try to win now, or if it crashes and burns, then at least we know. So, and I think that's kind of what we are both asking for is like, just show us what you're trying to do, because since we don't know what we're trying to do, like we don't even really know how to analyze any of this. We don't even know if they have addressed these problems yet in their planning. Like,
Right.
what happens if they go out and they take like an offensive lineman in the draft for like the, seventh straight year or something like that? What happens then?
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't know. That's the point. It's like, who knows where you go from there.
Right. Okay. So we've kind of got our offense talked about, and I think the next conversation to have would probably be on the defense. We'll kind of let this offensive episode simmer a little bit, and we'll allow it to kind of, seep into our beings, and, allow it to kind of marinate and, see what happens. I think we can kind of let this one sit and see what happens in the coming weeks, especially once free agency open up. But we do have an opportunity to talk about the defense, and we'll do that in another episode, and we'll kind of talk about what needs to happen, because there is still things that need to happen on the defensive side, perhaps even maybe more than, the number one paid defense in the league would require. But we'll have that conversation at some point. But as far as it goes, are you pretty like happy with what we've kind of prescribed for the offense as of now?
Yeah, I think so. I think we got a good game plan.
Okay, perfect. Well, as always, the Boardman Black and Gold podcast is sponsored by Zecca Enterprises, crafting furniture solutions in northwestern Pennsylvania. You can call 910-777-3871 to turn your furniture problems into furniture solutions. Keep an eye out for our defensive episode that'll come out at some point. Again, this offseason, we don't necessarily have a schedule for these, but they will be released semi-frequently, so we'll have that conversation when we get to there. So, and if you haven't yet, make sure you go back and listen to our quarterback and our running back episode to get our fully detailed takes on what we should do there for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And again, just keep an eye out for the post notifications on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast. We're also on YouTube, and we are on Twitter. BB&G on Twitter, or BB&G Podcast on Twitter, and then you can also follow Boardman and Gold on Instagram. Zane and David on the Boardman Black and Gold podcast. Thanks as always for listening, and we'll see you next time.